Hello, I'm Danny Daniels, and today is May 24th, 1978. And sitting with me to discuss his life as a performer, singer, and incredible dancer is my good friend, Jack Williams. Hello, Jack.
Hi, Dan.
And thank you for coming today and giving up your time to participate in this series on the history of tap dancing. I'm fascinated by the fact that that you were one of the headliners in show business, and then you got out of show business completely for a while, and now you're back into it again.
Well, to a degree. First, let me say, Danny, that I think it's my great pleasure that you called on me. I mean, it's just marvelous. It took me a year to get in, but with your encouragement, I was able, after not dancing for 20 years, you encouraged me to do it, and it took a lot of work, but it was a great compliment to me for you to ask me.
Well, all I can tell you, Jack, is I saw you dance way back in the early days of my Broadway career in Meet the People, and I remembered you and knew you were one of the great, remarkable tap dancers of our time. And when we were recently kind of brought together by our mutual friend Nanette Fabray, it was as far as I was concerned, it was a fortuitous kind of meeting.
It was the best thing in the world. It was marvelous.
And I've seen you do some dancing recently, and you're going to do some later for the viewers, and it's going to be a great treat to all of us. What I would like to do is to have you tell us a little bit about your professional career before we get back into the early days and talk about your training and where you learned how to dance. So bring us up to date from the time, perhaps, that you were started professionally.
Of the professional angle?
Right.
Okay, well, first of all, Danny, I was born in San Francisco, and my first professional engagement was at the Kit Kat Club, and this was a third-rate nightclub, actually. It was downstairs, and as we called them in those days, it was kind of an upholstered sewer, really.
And there were a lot of them.
Oh, there was many, many nightclubs. Mm-hmm. That's why the younger performers had a great break in those days to have a place to be lousy, and like George Burns says, there's no place to be lousy anymore, you know.
Yeah, well, this medium eliminated all of those.
It did. It's great, but anyway, the Kit Kat Club was my first experience, and they drove a very hard bargain there. You see, I was studying dancing at the time, but my teacher wanted me to get some experience, some real experience.
In front of an audience.
In front of an audience and in a club. So this man that owned the club drove a very hard bargain. He was aware of the fact that I sang, so he needed a singer for the band. So we made a deal, whereas I would sing with the band and I would dance in the floor show, and believe it or not, I was compelled to work in the men's room as a men's room attendant, handing out towels and brushing off clothes. Oh, yeah. He drove a hard bargain, but as we say, my artistic sense rebelled at this somewhat, but anything to get into show business.
You were desperate, weren't you?
Oh, desperate it was. But anyway, after the Kit Kat Club, where I stayed for quite some while, because he was getting a bargain at $15 a week. You know, a vocalist and a men's room. Oh,
he got
his bucks worth. Did he ever? But I worked after that. I spent quite a bit of time in San Francisco because of the training I was doing. At the same time, I was dancing. So I worked the Old Bal Tavern and the Italian Village and the 365 Club and all these places. And then came my first great thrill of the first vaudeville date that I had at the Golden Gate Theater with Horace Heidt. Now, actually, it's erroneous of me to call it vaudeville because it really wasn't. Vaudeville ended, as you know, in 31 and 32 after the crash. But this was called presentation, and you'd have a stage show go on about 12 o'clock. Then a picture would come on, and about 3 o'clock another stage show would come on the same. We do that five times.
Five shows
times.
A day.
And after that, after the Golden Gate, I lived at the YMCA at that time, and it was kind of the view from my window looked right up at the Hotel Mark Hopkins, which my world was San Francisco in those days. I had never been out of the state. And I'd look up at there, and I'd see that beautiful room, the Peacock Court, and I'd say to myself, my God, I'll never make it up there. Never in the world. That is the top. That is the epitome of the stars. Yeah, all they ever hired there were Velos and Yolanda and the DeMarcos, people like that.
Now, dancers were big stars in those days, weren't they? I mean, they used to headline
the teams. It was a big team. That was the team era. They were the biggies. And so I, as a young song and dance man, I really had no chance at all at that time. But as luck would have it, I left San Francisco and came down to L.A. here, and I got a job out on the Sunset Strip at a place called the Casanova Club, across from the Sunset Towers. It's still standing there. And this was a very late club where all the movie stars used to come, and after-hour places.
Now, what year is this again, Jack?
This would be 1936 now.
36,
And there, lo and behold, one night, after the show, a gentleman requested my presence at his table, and I went out and I obliged. I sat down, and we started to talk, and during our conversation, he looked over at me and he said, you know, kid, you're not bad at all. You're really not bad. He says, how would you like to appear in the Peacock Court of the Hotel Mark Hopkins? And I looked at him as if he's ready for the rubber room, you know, this guy. So I said, sure, I'd like to be President of the United States, too, while you're at it. What the hell, you know, throw it all in. He said, no, I'm serious. Would you like to appear there? And I said, God, yes, I would.
It was a real movie scenario.
Oh, my God, this was the biggest thing in my life. And sure enough, it was true. He was the boss of the Mark, and he told me I could open there in a few weeks, and I did. And I did pretty well, considering I was the first solo dancer that ever danced in there. The first time they'd ever had a solo dancer in there.
Was the floor slippery?
Very slippery.
Usually the floors in those places were so slippery.
It was treacherous, but I fixed some rubber on my shoes at that point. Well, anyway, this was a great jumping off place for me. A lot of things happened in between. I'll just go to the high spots. From the Mark Hopkins, I went right into the Chez Paris in Chicago, considered in those days to be probably the finest nightclub in the world, the Chez Paris. And that was the first time I ever saw my name in lights, and oh, what a thrill, my goodness, I swear. That was it. I'd have quit right then, you know, that was it. But anyway, from the Chez, I was booked right into the New York Paramount. Imagine the New York Paramount.
That's where the big time was.
Right, in there, just 1, 2, 3, and there I was with all the big bands. I played there ultimately, I played there about 11 different times.
Now, the Paramount was hard to dance on the stage, wasn't it?
Very hard. This was why very few dancers, that's why I played there so many times. There was only a few people who could actually work the Paramount, because there was they didn't use the stage as such, Dan. They used the orchestra pit. And that would come up with your big band on it, and then they would use just that little bit of apron, which was about 5 feet at the depth, and then as you went off stage, it was just about a foot.
Right.
And if you're no footlights, just you're blinded by the lights. So there was very few dancers who could work it. I worked crosswise.
Somebody fell into that.
Yeah, Paul Draper fell.
It was Paul.
Paul did. Paul couldn't work there. Hal Leroy and myself seemed to be the resident tap dancers there.
It was a large fall when you
7 feet, right down. 7 feet right down into oblivion, into the lap of a Bobby Soxer, right straight down. Anyway, that was a tremendous thrill to be there.
And the big bands that you danced with were who?
Well, I can start off with Harry James, both the Dorsey Boys, and Benny Goodman.
Benny Goodman.
And there was Johnny Long and
Horace
Horace Heidt was the Golden Gate. I can't think of them all, but they were all big bands.
Goodman and the Dorsey Brothers.
Brothers and James.
The big guys at that time.
That was a big guy, and from this engagement, the first one, I was signed for the last edition of the Ziegfeld Follies. However, it was never produced, to be honest with you. Something happened with the Schuberts, never got it on.
You never went to rehearsal even?
Never went to rehearsal. We got paid for our 2 weeks, and that was it, you know. So then I was approached for a show called Right This Way, and it certainly was never the right way, because it only lasted 8 days on Broadway. But it had a fantastic score.
You were living in New York at that time?
Yeah. I was right in New York then. And this show called Right This Way starred Joey Lewis, who had never been in a show before and couldn't remember slides.
He was a nightclub comic.
He was a nightclub comic, and he was an ad-lib artist. Even a book show was way beyond him. He wasn't the reason the show was bad. The show was just bad. But the musical score was fantastic. And I was lucky enough to be able to introduce 2 songs that eventually became standards, one of which was I Can Dream, Can't I? And I'll Be Seeing You was from this flop show.
That's incredible. I didn't know that was from a Broadway show, because it was popularized by Hildegard, wasn't it?
Well, it became the sentimental war song of World War II, really.
And you introduced that?
I introduced that, yeah. Yeah, I did. It was
in a flop show. That's,
in a flop show.
It's amazing that out of a flop show, some big songs came.
Right. Look at Very Warm for May, All the Things You Are. That was a flopperoo.
Flop show.
Very Warm, and here came All the Things You Are, one of the greatest songs ever written out of it. Anyway, from there, I was signed for another dream came true. I was signed for the George White Scandals, the last edition of George White Scandals in '38, and I danced with Ann Miller.
That was in New York also?
In New York, yeah. And that had the Three Stooges, Ella Logan, Willie and Eugene Howard. They had everybody in that show, and it was really a great show.
And whose score was that? Do you know?
That was Sammy Fain and Sammy Fain again. As was the Right This Way was Sammy Fain and Irving Cale. They both wrote both shows.
Right.
And I danced with Ann Miller, who I had met many years, well, not many years, a few years before that at the Casanova Club, which I talked about earlier.
Right.
When I went up to Mark Hopkins, before I went up, I watched an audition. The agent for the club went away that day and said, "Jack, watch the audition, see if there's anybody good in there." And I did. I watched it, and here walks on Ann Miller, and whose name was June Collier, I think.
And she was fresh from Texas.
Fresh from Texas. She'd just come from Texas, and she sang, "Got to Give a Little, Take a Little," and then she danced, and oh man, she danced like a man strong. And
feet were a blur.
Feet was beautiful. And so when he came back, I said, "Gee, there's a girl here that should sure take my place very easily while I'm going up the Mark." And so that's really was Ann's big break right there, you know.
Kind of gave her a push at the early stage of her
career.
Yeah.
Then to go on from George White's Scandals, I went into a review called Meet the People, which you mentioned earlier.
Right, that's when I remember you.
Yeah, that was a big hit show. We opened on the same night as Pal Joey, unfortunately, right across the street from the Pal Joey.
Now, were you in the original company of Meet the People?
No, I wasn't. The Meet the People...
Because that originated out here in L.A., didn't it?
Right, and I came out here after George White's Scandals, and I was really resting up, actually, and I went to see the show, and I knew Danny Dare, who produced it, and I went backstage and I said, "I want to be in this show." And he says, "What do you want to be in this thing for? You just came off Broadway. You don't want to be in this." I said, "Oh, yes, I do."
You liked the show?
I love the show. And there was so many things I wanted to do in the show, you know. I wanted to sing all the songs. I wanted to do the whole thing. So anyway, he said, "Hell, I'll put you in it. No, you know, I can't give you that kind of money." I said, "I don't care about the money. I just want to be in the show." He said, "We may go to New York," which we did do. Now, I was in the second company of it. The first company went on the road, and then we played here for a few months with a second company, and then we merged in Chicago with the two companies. They took the best of the two companies and went into New York with it. And as I say, unfortunately, we opened on the same night as Pal Joey, did it right across the street from it. They got the first string critics, and we got the second string critics. Nevertheless, it was a hit. It ran a year. And
it was a good hit. I remember it.
It was a nice show.
And they merged the two companies in the New York company.
Yeah, the New York company. They took the best out of both of the shows. And one little interesting thing that might interest you about that show was the dressing room arrangements we had. In my dressing room, there were 3 jacks. Now, I was the middle jack right here, and to the right of me, there was another Jack that eventually would become an Academy Award winner, namely Jack Albertson. And to my left was another Jack, who eventually became an award winner, Jack Gilford. Now, right across the hall, there was a couple of more Academy Award winners, eventual Academy Award winners, Shelley Winters and Nanette Fabre.
And Shelley Winters was in Meet the People.
Right.
I wasn't aware of that.
She didn't do too much in the show. She was, you know, a kid, you know, and she just breaking in and everything. But now, I don't know what happened to that middle Jack, but, well, it's a long story, I'll tell you. Everybody won Academy Award. But from Meet the People, which ran a year, I got another dream come true, was I got a Cole Porter show called Let's Face It, with Benny Baker and Eve Arden and Danny Kaye.
That was a big hit.
Nanette Fabre again, my dear friend Nanette Fabre, who we had a talk the other night, and I think we've done at least 1,000 shows together.
Done a lot of shows
at least 1,000 performances together, and she's a marvelous person. I just love her dearly. And she was in Let's Face It also, and that ran for 2 years. And gosh, I was really rolling in. You know, I was just.
You were in the big time.
Oh, it
that was
so
a big time.
And I had a nice fat movie contract ready to do at Columbia, and oh, everything was breaking just right for me. And then one day I got an invitation in the mail, and this invitation was to join a group of men, quite a large group of men actually. They wanted me to participate in something, I forget now what it, a war, that's what it was, a war, yeah. And
you were being drafted is what you
that's,
were.
in so many words, that's what it was. Now, I went to the draft board and I said, gee, I would sure like to have 12 weeks to do this picture because it's a big picture with Rita Hayworth, and I'd sure like to do it. But they said, no way, buddy, you're going in and win that war. Anyway, the strange thing about it is I took my basic training, and about a week after I was through with my basic training, I'd forgot about show business by this time. I was going to go over and fight the war. I suddenly was called back to New York to appear in an Air Force show called Wing Victory.
You're back in show business.
Back in show business, though. I was in the Army. I'm back into Wing Victory. Which
that was a fabulous show. Who wrote the music for that show?
David Rose. Dave Rose wrote the music, and we had the best musicians in the world in the pit, all in the Army, you know. On stage, we had Mario Lanza, we had Eddie O'Brien, we had Johnny Forsythe, we had Eugene Connolly, the opera star. We had every great that was, you know, available was in Wing Victory.
Now there was This Is the Army was running.
That was an Army show. That was Berlin's show. This was Moss Hart's show.
And this was Moss Hart's show.
Yeah, Moss Hart produced this.
And
excuse me.
What branch of the service was that?
That was Air Force. That was Hap Arnold's big baby.
So you were in the Air Force then?
Yeah, and Irving Lazar.
You weren't really in the Air Force. You were in show business, but you had an Air Force uniform on.
Right.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I can tell you a cute thing about this. I was doing bond rallies down in Greensboro when my orders came through, and I was making a lot of money for bonds, so they didn't show me the orders, and they'd cast most of Wing Victory before I got up there. And so I knew Moss Hart anyway. So the minute I walked in rehearsal, I was late, and I walked over and I said, "Gee, Moss, how are you?" And he said, "Look," he says, "You're not in the show very much, but you're in Sardi's, huh? Pretty good." So I said, "Yeah, thanks." You know. So anyway, that was his line. And this Wing Victory, we ran about a year in New York, and then we went out to Fox and made the picture. And then at the conclusion of the picture, we all broke up into small units, and we were sent overseas to the various theaters of operations of the war. Like there was, we had 3 dancers in the show, myself, Ray McDonald and Walter Long were all 3 dancers, and we alternated in one scene dancing. One would do it one night, one would do it the next. Great dancers. I love them both. They were just great. Now, in our unit, the unit we were in, we were lucky we were sent to ETO, Europe. And in our unit, there was Red Buttons, Tommy Farrell, Archie Robbins, Kenny Forbes, and myself. Now, we had a complete show there because
that was the unit, just those
this was our little
guys.
unit, and they sent us over special orders, Project Zebra they called it, big deal.
And you worked in the back of a Jeep of some kind?
Yeah, well not, once we were over there, Mickey Rooney was the head, he really was the head. He organized it with Josh Logan. Jeep shows. Now, the reason for the name Jeep shows is that we would go up in the front lines and entertain off the back of Jeeps, you know, and it was kind of unique in that way.
Were you dancing? Did you do dancing?
No, I just sang. I sang, and I did sketches with Tommy Farrell, and I did all the burlesque
comedy
bits.
sketches.
Yeah, the machacha and all of the things that the GIs loved, you know, and we did all of that kind of thing. Then after that, after the war was over, we were all sent back to Paris, and in Paris, Josh Logan was producing a show called OK USA, which I wish, how I wish that would have been videotaped, because of course there was no videotape in those days.
It was done where, in Paris?
In Paris, at the Madeline Theater for the Occupational Forces. Beautiful little theater. We had Mickey Rooney and Bobby Breen and Tommy Farrell, and Artie Duncan was even in it. They danced to the Lawrence Welk Show. And Eugene List, the concert pianist, and just anybody that was capable of going. And the sketches were all written by Kaufman and Hart. The music was by Huey Green, and all of the big people contributed to this show, you know, for free.
Now, when was the Potsdam Conference thing that you told me about?
This comes later.
It was later.
After this show broke up, it was during this show that they rounded us all up one day from the various bars that we were sprawled out in and sobered up and put on a plane at Orly Field to go somewhere. We knew not where we were going, but there was just the Mickey Rooney, Red Buttons, and Tommy Farrell, myself, and it was and Eugene List. We were all, so once on the plane, this general explained to us, he said, you have been picked out of all of the entertainers in Europe, and that included the USO even, to entertain at the Potsdam Conference and entertain the big three and all of the brass and of Russia and everywhere, you know.
And the big three was
the big
Stalin?
Three was Stalin, Churchill, and Truman at the time. And every big shot there was, I guess,
command
was there.
performance for the,
it was a command
the leaders
performance.
of the world at that point.
They searched us 90,000 times before we ever got in a room, you know. Now this show was held in a little a mansion outside of Berlin called Potsdam, actually the town of Potsdam, on a makeshift stage. And in retrospect, it's kind of funny, really, because there was one big catch. Mr. Stalin didn't understand English at all. And as he was the dominant figure in the room,
Did he have an interpreter with her or something?
Well, if he did, we didn't see him.
Oh,
you know,
really?
we didn't get that close to him. You know, we could see him, but
how far away were they sitting?
Oh, about from here to that first camera, or the wall actually.
About 10, 15 feet.
Yeah, and of course, the jokes we were doing in the front of the show went right in the old porcelain container because he didn't know anything, and everybody looked to him to see whether he was laughing or whatever. Now
took their cue from him.
Luckily, Tommy Farrell had a pantomime that he did, and Mr. Stalin loved that because he could understand it. And then, of course, I sang. He accepted that, and I danced a little bit. He accepted that.
Did you dance very much?
Not much. It wasn't. We got afraid of it after that, you know. And so I cut it short. And then, but he loved Eugene List because, after all, music being the international language, he played Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and it was just great. And after this show, we were all sent home finally, and I found myself back on the Paramount stage again for about the 8th or 9th time. And after the Paramount, I was signed for another show called If the Shoe Fits, a Leonard Sillman show, and then into a Max Shulman show called Barefoot Boy with Cheeks. These all had runs.
If the Shoe Fits was a predecessor of the New Faces?
New Faces, yeah. Leonard did some New Faces after that, though. After If the Shoe Fits, it was good. It was a good show, and then I did a revival of On Your Toes also. And in the meantime, I did Roberta with Bob Hope.
On Your Toes, in the revival, did you do the Ray Bolger role?
No, I did the father role in it. There was a father, Bobby Van did. I was too old to do at that point, you know, that was revival was in 58 or 59,
oh, I see.
you know,
right.
so I did the father part of it.
And you did the Roberta,
Yeah, now this was, I have to go back a little bit for this Roberta, but I think it's kind of interesting. The first revival of Roberta, which, as you know, was a big hit in the early 30s,
right.
Starred Bob Hope and Ray Middleton and Faye Templeton and many Tamara.
Astaire wasn't in the Broadway show, wasn't he?
No.
I know they made a movie out of that.
He wasn't. Yeah, he was in the movie. But anyway, they revived it here at the Civic Light Opera. Edwin Lester. His first of the mini-series, which you've worked for, Edwin.
Right.
The first of those mini-series was the revival of Roberta.
The very first?
The very first one was
that
Roberta.
A fact?
That's when he installed this series.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that.
And what is kind of ironic about it is they had everybody in the original cast except George Murphy. And George Murphy couldn't make it. He was making a picture, so he couldn't do this revival. We ran about a month here at the Civic Light Opera. And so I was the only one that wasn't in the original cast. I was a kid. And
what year was that now?
That was about 38 or 37, somewhere around there. And anyway, George Murphy came down and coached me in the part and everything, and so everything. And would you believe, I think this is quite a distinction. Bob Hope played straight man for me. I think it's the first time Bob Hope ever played straight man. I did a bit on the different types of tap dancers we have in the world today. and they needed a little comedy spot somewhere in the show, and he asked if anybody did something like that, and they said, yeah, I was a brash kid, so I said, yeah, I'll do it. And he said, okay. He said, I got to be a straight man for this? Are you kidding? And I said, sure.
And you did your tap dance bit in the...
Yeah, I did all the different types of dances, the weed puller and the buzzard type and the floor chopper type and the pointer type. And he was straight man. It was one of the best things in the show. So that was kind of interesting, I think, to look back on those kind of things.
Well, can we get back to your beginnings now as a tap dancer? Because that gives us a good background of your professional life. Where did you first study tap dancing? I assume it was in your hometown in San Francisco?
In Santa Rosa. I had moved to Santa Rosa after I lived in San Francisco. And in Santa Rosa, during my grammar school days, there was a little dancing school there run by a woman called Esther Walker. And it became very evident in my young life that I was not a scholar. I mean, I just wanted to dance. That's all I ever wanted to do, was to dance and sing and perform, you know. And so I went to the dancing school, and I learned the waltz clog, and I learned to do triples, and then we do reviews at the local theater every so often. And this was great, and I thought I was just about the bitter end. I was it.
Had a high opinion.
Oh, I thought I was right
up
away.
there. Yeah.
So anyway, my folks, who I'm sure were very glad to get rid of me, sent me to San Francisco, said, if you're going to do something, do it right. Go down and study with the best there was at that time. And so I went into the Reed McLean studios down there, and I walked in very cocky, and I said, I'd like to study from you. And he said, well, have you ever danced before? And I said, heck yes, I'm great. You know, I'm great. You don't, I mean, I'm big. He said, well, let me see you do something. So I did my waltz clog, and he said, my God, you are awful. And I said, why? He said, let me call in a couple of kids here. And oh, he took me down to size so bad I wanted to kill myself that night. But anyway, I stood up under it, and he taught me for a long time. And
now, what was his background?
Well, his background, he was a great admirer, and I guess an acquaintance or a friend of George Primrose, who danced in soft shoes, as you know, I'm sure.
Yes, yes. Louis Dupron told me about George Primrose teaching his father some soft shoe dances. And so he was the great stylist of that.
Of the vaudeville. Yeah, the vaudeville days. But anyway, Reed McLean was a fine teacher, and he worked for Fanchon and Marco for years, and he would not only dance, but he was, if you could call them choreographers in those days, they didn't really do too much, but get somebody in a line.
He worked for Fanchon and Marco?
Yeah, and then he'd go out with the various units, and he'd do a little solo, but he would
I see. He performed with them, you mean?
He performed. And then he opened this school, which was very successful, and he was a very dear friend of Bill Robinson's, who I admired and was a great inspiration to me. Bill Robinson is a great performer.
Were there any other Bill Robinson was one of your great...
my first, yeah, you know, that was, and, well,
who else was a kind of an inspiration? Did you have any idols in those
Of course, it would be ludicrous not to say that Fred Astaire inspired everybody in the world.
Oh, he was the granddaddy of all of us, I think.
There'll be nobody like him ever again. I mean, that takes nothing away from the others. They're great, too.
Yes, well, I think we all feel that way.
We talked about one night, Danny, I don't think you can ever say there's a greatest dancer. There just isn't. I mean, the categories that there are, you know. Anyway, get back to your question. I'm digressing. I'm sorry. There was Astaire, and I loved the Nicholas brothers, and I loved the Condas brothers, and
there were just so many good ones in those days.
I mean, you couldn't go to a show without seeing somebody great in their own style of work, you know. Therefore, everybody inspired me. I mean, they didn't have to be good, and I'd say, oh, great.
But you had a particular affinity for Bill Robinson.
Because I met him.
You met him, and your teacher had
he was a good friend of,
And did you see a lot of Bill Robinson dancing?
Yeah, whenever he would come, which he did very often, he played the Loew's Warfield or the Golden Gate Theater, and he would always come to the studio. Then finally, I got to a point where Reed McLean, the teacher, said, I want you to see a young man dance just like you. And of course, I had watched Bill Robinson day in and day out, 5 shows a day, so I knew his routine backwards.
What did you do? You stayed and saw the show 5 times?
5 times. I'd never leave the theater because I didn't have money enough to go back in again. So I stayed right there.
I used to do that with a Astaire picture.
Sure, yeah, I stay right there. And so Bill Robinson came up, and watched me dance. And I did this whole act, right, from Ain't Misbehaving on down, the song and the cane and the whole, everything he did, I did right.
And all the
word
steps.
for word.
You knew
and
all
the
steps?
jokes, everything.
Yeah.
Boy, I did all. Well, he just got such a kick out of this. Didn't resent it a bit. I mean, it was kind of nervy of me to do, but I just said, well, I didn't have any better sense than to do it. So anyway, he was very much responsible for the inspiration. But well, dancing was my life, Danny. I would rehearse for as long, and I'd get a lesson every day from Reed, but I would go in at 9 o'clock, and they close the studio at 9.
This is in the
Reed McLean, right on Market Street over the Embassy Theater. And I would rehearse all day long until I wouldn't want to leave. They said, well, we got to turn out the lights. And I said, oh, the heck, well, that's all right. The street lights are good enough. The street lights would come in, you know. He said, you mean you're going to stay up here all alone in the dark? I said, I'm not in the dark. My eyes will get used to it. I got to get this clear. Got to get this down, man. And he says, you're crazy. I said, no, I'm not. And I was a fast 135 pounds, you know. Oh, man.
You were a tall, skinny kid at those days, right?
I just looked like a microphone out there. You know, that's all it was, you know. Really,
and you started at 9 o'clock in the morning.
9 o'clock in the morning. And this is true. I swear, this is gospel.
And you danced
till
all
they
day long,
closed.
and a little lunch?
Oh, yeah, a sandwich. I'd bring in a brown baguette, and then I would go till 12 o'clock.
Incredible.
And I would just keep doing rolls. I'd do rolls. I tried to turn my foot the way that he wanted me to do.
It's on a shuffle.
Yeah, I had to do it his way.
We'll do that later on.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'd like to show you that because it's, to all young people that learn to dance, I think it's a great technique.
Now, that's from Lancashire, I believe you told me.
Yeah, now,
Lancashire clog?
What was of great benefit to me, and really, what if I do have a style of my own, I really owe it more or less to this gentleman I'm about to tell you about. One day in Reed McLean's studio, an elderly Australian fellow came in, and he started dancing in wooden shoes. We were all using split soles, and all of a sudden he started to do some strange things, real strange, you know. And I got to talking to him, kid. I was a friendly kid. I walked over, and he kind of patted me on the head and liked me, you know. And so he started showing me these Lancashire clog steps, you know. And he'd played in Lancashire and researched tap dancing and everything. And he was retired, and he was just up there fooling around with dancing, you know.
How old a gentleman was he?
Oh, he had to be, in my eyes of a kid, probably, you know.
Probably looked ancient to you.
Oh, he did.
In retrospect,
I would say he was 60, 65. He was up in years.
And we're talking about 1936?
36, 37.
And he was in his 60s already.
Yeah, at least, yeah. And so he taught me a lot of things that nobody else was lucky enough to get. He kind of, you know, he liked me, and he said, well...
Right from the Lancashire clog technique, and he worked in the split clogs. That was
the split soles.
The wooden sole.
Wooden soles, and wooden heels.
And the wooden heel that were sewed onto a leather sole, as I remember.
Right, yeah. And he taught me also the theory. He loved a lot of theory about dancing. I don't know if they have enough time to go into it or not. But
how are we doing with time out there? Are we okay? Okay, yeah, just...
well, I'll just touch upon it lightly. From what I can understand through him, tap dancing really started in Lancashire in England, where the factory workers in those days wore wooden shoes, not to dance in, but just to keep out of the dampness, apparently.
Right. I was told that I read someplace where the floors were damp, and they put wooden soles on their shoes so that they wouldn't be wet during.
And so it evolved where they would stand there doing some monotonous job, and they would start to click their heels and fool around with these, and suddenly they began to do little steps, and they would have contests on Sunday. It was not a professional thing at all.
Just something for recreation.
Something for recreation. They'd have these great contests in the town square, you know, and they'd dance. And he said, I really do believe the guy, this Tilden was his name.
Yes, that sounds. It sounds. There is documentation of that. At least I've read. Yes, I've read some, and it's interesting to hear that you knew it firsthand. Because
I knew it firsthand. He told me the whole thing way back in the 30s. He said that is where it really started. There are theories that it started in Ireland and so forth. I mean, we really did. We improved it, and naturally, it is an American art, as far as I see.
Well, when it came here, the Irish brought their step dancing, and the cloggers came over with the clog dancing, and they merged with the black
the
with
blacks
the
with
slaves,
the rhythm, yeah, right.
And they took that technique and added their own African rhythms, and that's what emerged as American tap dancing.
It was harmonious. It was a great wedding of all things to put together there. You know, really, really great.
And when you got into this Lancashire dancing, did you add things to it? Did you add your own heels and your own, so that what came out was a little bit of Jack Williams?
What I did was I took the Lancashire technique and I applied. See, I studied ballet too. I studied everything was to study. I studied, you know, and I learned to turn and I learned to do six pirouettes. I got up even to 6 pirouettes at one time, double air turns and everything. But I took the Lancashire clog and I saw where it had great possibilities for doing other things, different movements with that technique. And therefore I applied it and I created my own combination.
And added a little bit of arms, a little bit of ballet.
Oh, sure, you're individual. Huh? Yeah, right. You know, you try to be different if you can, you know. And
well, I want you to show us the way that you did that shuffle with the rolling motion. And then I want you to do, if you will, some of your own special kind of tap dancing, because I've seen you dance recently, and I think that it's remarkable, and I know it's going to be marvelous to have for this record that we're doing. So if you want, we can step over on the floor and do some of the steps.
Love to. Okay.
Oh, before.